Thanksgiving. The national holiday of the United States that's also celebrated in Germany and Canada and other places. A day of thanks and gratitude where Americans gorge themselves on as much food as they possibly can, eating turkey, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, macaroni and cheese, and all sorts of other things. A day to celebrate, as this picture shows, the freedom from want, probably the most famous Thanksgiving image ever by Norman Rockwell. A day for hilarious antics, children eating at a smaller table than the adults. A very underrated day that is becoming increasingly overshadowed by the next day, Black Friday, when all the Thanksgiving goes out the window and all the gratitude seemingly dissipates as people become as consumeristic as possible as they get ready for the next big holiday, Christmas. A day where Christmas music is heard even though it's a month away. A day with a great history, an underrated holiday, one of gratitude and appreciation, one that has a long and interesting backstory. With the communal ties, Thanksgiving and rejoicing being as much a part as the first Thanksgiving as it is of the one this day. A day of joy, gratitude, and thanksgiving for some may very well be a day of mourning and suffering and hardship for others. The traditions, practices, and customs of the popular holiday are nothing without understanding the history, and it all began with the Pilgrims, a group of Puritans known formerly as the Separatists who believed that the Church of England had become too corrupt and believed that God wanted them to start over in a new land. They were heavily persecuted by the church, especially King James I, who believed that all Christians should be Anglicans, and proper Anglicans, not too Reformed or Calvinistic. The Calvinists, upset with this, decided that they had no part in the Church of England and did not want to fix it as their fellow Puritans did. They fled to the Netherlands, creating a new home for themselves, where they believed they could worship with fellow Calvinists in a way God would want. But they were disappointed in the Netherlands, finding it too worldly and ungodly for their taste. So they returned to England, and with the blessing of the king, who couldn't get rid of them fast enough, donned two ships, the Mayflower and the Speedwell, in the fall of 1620, and departed for America. Many of them died from diseases, the conditions were harsh. To top it all off, they were blown off course. Initially headed for Virginia and the Jamestown colony already there, they eventually ended up in what became New England. Aboard the ship, the men, who were unsurprisingly the leaders at this time, crafted a charter, the Mayflower Compact, the first governing document in the United States. In November of 1620, they finally arrived, and under the leadership of their resilient governor, William Bradford, they landed at Plymouth Rock. At least, that's what they say. What became known as Plymouth, named after a town in England. Despite believing that God had brought them to this land, they suffered a horrible first winter, many of them dying from disease, unable to fish properly or plant the crops they needed, and completely foreign to the land. They would have perished had it not been for the intervention of a native chieftain, Massawat, the leader of a local Wampanoag people who occupied the Plymouth colony and has become a legend in the Thanksgiving story. Massawat believed that the local natives needed help against their fellow enemies, so he sent one of his emissaries, a native named Squanto from another tribe who had been captured by the Portuguese and was not only a Christian but also spoke English and could communicate with them. Massawat believed that this would bring them into their sphere of influence and give them a new ally. The Wampanoag were a powerful and prideful people who had been there for a long time. They had occupied the region, and the Pilgrims understood very quickly that they were at the behest of the Wampanoag. Despite having better weapons, the Wampanoag had more people, and they were obviously superior in both understanding of the land and its layout and in farming techniques. In addition to this, according to Massawat, the Wampanoag needed all the help they could get against the other tribes, most notably the Massachusetts to the north. That was what the state was named after. So, at the behest of Massawat, and with Squanto leading the way, the Wampanoag taught the local Pilgrims how to fish and farm, cultivate land, and sign a defense pact. Without Squanto's intervention, the Pilgrims would probably have perished, similar to the Roanoke colony of 1586 in Virginia. Understanding the land and the people also meant understanding the soil, such as growing corn, which could be made into chumash, a popular dish for the natives. Therefore, with the help of Squanto and the other Wampanoag, the Pilgrims were able to thrive, learning how to fish, farm, and hunt all throughout the spring and summer of 1621, and prepare a proper harvest festival in order to prepare for the bitter winter ahead. In order to celebrate, they had a day of rejoicing, whereas Thanksgiving would involve fasting. They settled upon a several-day feast to commemorate their time spent in the New World, and to celebrate their victory. They did not invite the natives to it. However, when Massawat heard gunfire coming from their celebration, thinking they were being attacked by other natives, he sent emissaries, and he himself accompanied them, eventually being welcomed at the Thanksgiving table as they brought chumash and other dishes, while the Pilgrims mainly relied on fish dishes. Yes, there was pheasant and perhaps even turkey, but ham was not present, neither was sweet potato pie, mashed potatoes, or pumpkin pie. Those dishes would come much later on. However, the celebration lasted several days and was quite successful, as the relations between the Puritans, Pilgrims, and the natives continued to be good throughout most of the 16th 1620s. A new alliance was formed, where the Pilgrims believed they had a conversion field with the new natives who needed to come to Christ, and the natives believed they had backup against fellow rivals. But with the coming of over 10,000 more Puritans, many of them armed in 1630 with the establishment of Massachusetts Bay Colony at the city of Boston, the natives found themselves in a precarious position as their lands were threatened. However, they did make alliances and continued to work closely with the Puritans, who wanted to work with different tribes. These tribes banded together with the Puritans, helping them to survive and teaching them the same skills, as both sides held some sort of mutual respect. And they often went to war with each other, such as Pequot's War in 1636, in which many natives were slaughtered as native allies, along with the Pilgrims and Puritans, defeated them. In order to celebrate the victory against them and the killing of 700 Pequots, Governor John Winthrop declared a day of Thanksgiving, the first time the term was ever used. Later on, King Philip, as he was known, Metacotmet, another native tribal chieftain, worried about the influx of Puritans and more of them into his western Massachusetts lands now in the 1670s, rose several native tribes against them. And once again, with the help of some native allies, fewer in number due to disease, death, and warfare, the land of the natives was taken over by the land of the white man. An unfortunate, bloody decision that was often mixed with diseases that the Europeans brought that was copied throughout most of North and South America from Columbus's first arrival in the 1490s, all throughout the plains of the stories of the United States and the natives versus the cowboys in the 19th century, along with the Native Americans of Central and South America who were killed off by Spanish invaders and conquistadors. No matter their diversity, their location, their experiences, their cultural traditions, often which clashed against each other, they were seen as the same by the Europeans, and no matter the experience, they were often exposed to diseases, seen as barbarians who needed to be converted, and when they would not convert, were often killed off and enslaved or died from the multitudinous diseases for which they had no resistance brought by the white man. As was the case with Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay, so was it everywhere. Some whites, such as William Penn in Pennsylvania, tried to fight against this trend. However, he was in the minority and eventually outvoted, as the original peaceful situation and the mutual beneficial arrangement between the natives of the Wampanoag people and the Pilgrims seemed to deteriorate, and the original peaceful days, highlighted at the first Thanksgiving celebration, seemed to deteriorate into nothingness as more natives died off and more land was taken. A day of beneficence, a mutual celebration of community and unity. How did this become the national holiday so associated with turkeys, which might not have been eaten that first day? Well, the answer for that lies in more history, the history of the Civil War. In the midst of the bloodshed, with hundreds of thousands dying, President Abraham Lincoln needed a national holiday in order to unite the nation and bring peace and harmony. And he picked Thanksgiving, thanks to the efforts of Sarah Josephia Hale, a columnist and writer who had, among others, recipes for pumpkin pies and turkeys, which obviously became part of the lexicon of Thanksgiving, and she advised Lincoln, as she had tried with other presidents, to make it a national holiday. It had been celebrated throughout most of American history. However, in this time of division, when the message of Thanksgiving and its ideal was unity and cooperation with people of all stripes, Lincoln used that message and Hale's insistent demands to make it a national holiday in 1863, pardoning the first Thanksgiving turkey, whom he named Jack. The bravery and brilliance of Hale, the ingenuity of Lincoln, and the message of unity that Thanksgiving brings had made it a national forefront. And in 1941, President Roosevelt, once again in the midst of more division within the nation, made it a national holiday as the image, Norman Rockwell's Freedom from Want, was commissioned by the New Deal program and reminded many of the message of Thanksgiving and the hope for unity. A story of people who escaped their land, seeking to worship and understand and live the way they wanted, who were saved by the generosity and goodness of native groups, which they often ignored, whose beneficence they eventually begrudgingly celebrated in a period of rejoicing and, yes, giving thanks. This was the original story, and despite its less than clean history and its horrible meaning for many Native Americans and the deterioration of relationship, it remains an ideal of giving thanks, of community, of coming together and showing gratitude for what others have done for you, of coming around to eat and share stories and enjoy one's life, and not be divided but reminded of who we are. That is what the Pilgrims, Lincoln, the Wampanoag, Sarah Joseph Fay Hale, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have wanted when it came to Thanksgiving. And it is probably not too bad of a goal for us to want the same thing this Thanksgiving as well.